Good morning, everyone. It's Savalismo. I'm brand manager for FCL. I've been there for 8 years. A big part of my role is obviously on brand and product development and sourcing product. I've been in the food industry for over 30 years, the majority spent in the grocery business. So being in the grocery business, trying to understand consumer insights, social and cultural changes, and predicting food trends is paramount to building an effective retail strategy. That's why the key to successful product launches is having a deep understanding of the customers and potential customers. And this is challenging. It's challenging because of the fast-paced change of how products are launching, new trends, changing food habits, and those challenges are even more prevalent during the pandemic as consumers are forced into changing eating habits, shopping habits, and lifestyle habits. Today, I would like to introduce you to Joanne McArthur to lead us through a market and consumer insight presentation. Just a reminder, this is a pre-recorded session. Audiences can use the chat box to the right side of the screen to ask Joanne questions. Joanne McArthur is the founding partner and president of Nourish Food Marketing. She works to build powerful brands for food and beverage products in Canada, US, and Europe, creating marketing strategies to help move products off the shelf into consumer shopping basket onto their plates. Joanna spent a career building brands with consumers and retailers, and these are some huge giants here: Molson, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, and Cadillac Fairview. She has worked with entrepreneurs to launch award-winning products with municipal, provincial, and federal agencies to create programs that support Canada's food industry. Welcome, Joanne.
Thank you, Sav. Thank you for that introduction. Really looking forward to this. Wish I could be there live with everybody, but maybe next year. So I like to say that Nourish is a specialist agency. We know a lot about a little. And because of that, we have kind of a privileged, I think, view of the whole food ecosystem, which we work across. As Sav mentioned, we work with everybody from producers and processors through to retailers, food service, and manufacturers. So because of that, we're often able to connect dots that other people and other companies can't see. And so we've been putting out a trend report. This is our 5th year. And this trend report came out in November of last year. You can see that we've got a pretty good record in terms of our predictions. And those were the last 2 years. And I should make the point that, you know, none of these, we're not making value statements with any of these trends when we talk about it. These are just things that we are seeing from the consumer side. And so this was the 2021 trends. At the end of my presentation, there'll be a link where you can download the whole trend report. I'm going to go through some of these and a few others that I think are most important for protein, the protein industry. But first, we're a year into COVID pretty much at this point. And so, you know, we can't talk about trends without looking at what's actually happened as a result of COVID. And certainly one of the big things is predicting the future based on past behavior is a lot less accurate because of that. We've seen our relationship with food change, not just how we've been consuming and buying it, but also cooking. The #1 skill increase during the pandemic time was cooking. So we're seeing a lot of changes there. People are now looking at food for health credentials. One thing that's stayed consistent, though, is consumers' obsession with protein. We know that in this country, we get more than enough protein, but consumers still very much interested in that. But also during pandemic time, we've seen research that says 43% of Canadians are actively trying to add more plant-based foods into their diets. So let's look at what we think the future holds. And the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that right now we are seeing two Canadas. What do I mean by that? So there's a saying going around that you've probably heard that we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And that's certainly true during this pandemic. So while, you know, about half of consumers, Canadians, say they have less money to spend on food, there's another half of Canadians that actually have more discretionary income than ever. Why is that? Well, that's because they haven't been able to travel. They haven't been going out and spending a lot of money on entertainment and food service. Childcare expenses are down, commuting expenses are down. So you've really seen a polarization. And what's happening is this middle is kind of disappearing. And so that, you know, says something about products. And so when you're looking at products, both ends of that spectrum are going to have very different ways of defining value and what's important to them. So for instance, those on the who've maintained their job during the pandemic have more discretionary income. They're going to define value as perhaps convenience. They are willing to pay for delivery of products. And they are also willing to pay for their own value system. So that's why we've seen a huge increase in organics, in certified humane, in fair trade. Organics during the pandemic has had a really tough time filling the demand. On the other side, you're going to see a lot of consumers moving towards private label. Because that's going to be less expensive for them. And, you know, they're going to try to just, you know, make ends meet. So again, very different views. And we also know that there's 16% of consumers out there who limit or avoid animal proteins because of cost reasons. It's not because of value statements. It's not for health. It's because of price. At the same time, we're seeing that the price of plant-based meats are starting to fall. You saw Impossible just announced south of the border that they are reducing price by 20% to retail. Huge decrease at a time when their demand is up. So you don't usually see that. They've said that they are going to continue to lower prices until it's actually cheaper than beef. So that's something that you should have on your radar as well. And, you know, while we're seeing plant-based, everybody's talking about the huge rise in plant-based, true, but remember, it's coming off a very, very small base. All proteins are up right now. Plant-based growing at the fastest rate, but again, you know, it's only about 2% of the market. So, you know, those numbers are, you know, not as impressive as they may sound. But what we are starting to see as more products are coming into the market, we're starting to see more things on pack around the protein quality as well as digestibility, sort of the amino acid profile that's actually starting to show up on packs. So just some food for thought. You know, certainly meat is not going away, but it may lose its center of the plate. Consumers may want to eat less, but eat better meats in terms of, you know, some of those labels that we talked about. So you want to make sure the one place you probably don't want to be going forward is what I call that mushy middle, as we start to see a polarization in markets. Another thing that we're seeing right now is a real blurring of channels and labels. So, you know, the way that trends used to move through the marketplace, you'd see a book come out and, you know, you can see on my slide, I'm talking about where the rise of cauliflower came from. You know, we're certainly having more than a fad with cauliflower and cauliflower rice. And usually, you know, it goes through some influencer writes a book, it becomes a trendy diet, it gets adopted by usually food service first, and then it starts showing up in restaurant or in grocery sections and goes out into other products. Well, we're starting to see that really blur a little bit and change. Why is that? Because there's a lot of direct to consumer channels now. You can actually, we're seeing a lot of plant-based proteins and emerging proteins going direct to consumer. And millennials do really, are overdeveloped on digital channels. So they're over-indexing on plant-based, they're over-indexing on digital. So you're seeing a lot of direct-to-consumer plays as well. And QSR is still a gateway for change. You just have to look at A&W and Beyond Meat and how they really helped popularize that. But again, for plant-based, you need to make sure it's still really craveable. You know, we still have 67% of Canadians saying that they don't think the taste of plant-based is as good as the products that they actually replace. We're also starting to see real blurring in terms of definitions. So we're not seeing labeling of people being vegan or vegetarian the same way we used to. So start thinking about and rather than or. It's that whole flexitarian thing. So people aren't necessarily just going to be meat eaters or just going to be plant-based. It's going to be and rather than or. And we certainly saw this with Kroger when they were doing their experimenting with where to place plant-based, particularly Beyond Meat, in the supermarket. And they tried it in a number of different places. Where it sold best was in the meat bunker. And all of the Kroger test data said that those people who were buying those plant-based products, over 90% of them were also purchasing meat. So it's very much an and situation. But why do consumers do it? It's different for different generations. So for millennials, for Gen Z, it's more of reasons of climate health, planet health. And for boomers, of course, it's more about personal health as well. But, you know, I talk about plant-based a fair bit because I do think we're in a time of fundamental shift. And this is not new. If you look at history, if you look at even 40 years ago, consumers on average ate about 90 pounds of beef a year. And now it's kind of flipped with chicken, right? Beef's down to about, you know, chicken was about 40. It's now up to 90 and beef's fallen down. So we have historically seen these kind of flips in diets in the past. Direct consumer channels are also growing for meat proteins, especially specialty meats. We've seen specialty meats like bison up almost 200% during this COVID period. And I'm showing you something that's just been launched by the co-founder of HelloFresh, the big meal kit company. And this is where they ship frozen pre-seasoned cuts of meat directly to consumers. Very well funded, this meat by mail concept. And we expect to see more of this going forward. We're also starting to see a rise in values-based eating. Certainly during COVID, people have been living online a lot more, and there's been a real examination during this period of societal inequities, inequality. And agriculture found itself on the front page with the whole migrant worker issue. And that's in the top left, that's an ad that actually ran in a number of Canadian magazines. And we're expecting this spotlight on social justice and migrant workers to continue and how they're being treated, especially with the election of Biden and Harris in the US. Kamala Harris comes from California, which is the biggest agricultural state in the US. and she has actually pushed for worker protection throughout her career, and they have just come up with a Fairness for Farm Workers Act. So we expect to feel ripples across the border there as well. And just as we've seen fair trade on the rise for products that are sold outside of North America, we're starting to see this food justice certified markets surface within North America to say that the workers there were treated well, whether it's in processing factories, whether it's in the field. So expect more of that. And this is all sort of part of this, call it conscious capitalism, which is really the next evolution of CSR for companies. And that's where there's a recognition that companies are there to make a profit. But while making that profit, they also need to include stakeholders that perhaps haven't had a voice in the past. So those stakeholders could be the environment. They could be the workers as well. And, you know, this isn't way out there. You see Whole Foods has been practicing this. Trader Joe's is practicing this. Starbucks. And you're certainly seeing mainstream publications talking about this, Harvard Business School, Forbes. So again, we're going through a time of real upheaval right now. And so it's time, I think, to relook your company's values as well as your CSR policies to make sure that you're on side for this movement. We're also seeing more knowledge-based eating. And radical transparency was something we talked about in our 2018 trend report. And at the time, I don't think ag producers were really ready for that. There's always been this curtain between consumers and producers. And I think the producers liked it that way. But during COVID, that veil, that curtain has really fallen, because for the first time, consumers saw the food system bend. It didn't break, but it bent. And so for the first time, they saw staples that were not in their supermarkets. They saw empty shelves. As you know, everybody pivoted with the share of stomach moving from food service to grocery. And so, you know, for the first time, consumers have started questioning and actually wanting to understand how food gets to their table. There wasn't a real recognition of the fact that there were different distribution systems and how things actually get to a grocery store. And you can see that for the first time, consumers actually were Googling meat processing. That's a Google Trends that we always look like. That went way up as things became front page news. And so we're starting to see that consumers really want to understand how their products are farmed and what conditions the animals were in. And, you know, we sum up all of that in a term called Made Matters. And we know that consumers, most consumers, I think it's less than 5%, have ever actually been on a working farm. And, you know, certainly as generations go by, we become further and further removed from the source of our food. And we know as well, though, that consumers trust farmers, but not necessarily farming. And so they want more disclosure. The UK often leads in this area, and Tesco, which is one of the big grocery chains there, has actually teamed up with the World Wildlife Foundation. And they've come up with an ambitious goal of having the environmental impact of the average UK shopping basket. And they've developed this sustainable basket metric, which actually identifies and targets certain things in the food system to tackle the things that are causing the most severe environmental impacts. So that's a trend that I expect will start moving up here as well. So think about what meaningful transparency could mean for your food business. You know, we always say it's one thing to tell consumers, it's much stronger to actually show them on your website, whether that's, again, a picture is good, but video even better. how far can you go? Can you go as far as perhaps even live streaming conditions? And there are some producers in the US that are currently doing that. So how far can you pull that veil back to build that consumer trust? We're also seeing the rise of what I call ethics-based eating. And certainly in last year's trend report, we talked about environmental impact-based eating. If you fast forward a year, we're now seeing signs of this actually mainstreaming. So the big restaurant chain Chipotle now lets you actually calculate the environmental footprint of your order with its online real food print tool. And Panera Bread, another big chain, they've become the first to label entrees as climate friendly. And so you can see your menu's carbon footprint. And they've actually labeled more than half their meals now, these cool food meals that meet the guidelines for emissions from WRI. And it says, we have to reduce the carbon imprint of our food by about 38%. And they've come up with, similar to how many calories you should consume in a day, they've come up with a calculation for how much of a carbon footprint your eating should have in a day. So that's very, that's mainstreaming as well. So we're starting to see this at a real tipping place. And, is plant-based going to evolve to kind of planet-based? And there's a very interesting video. If you're interested in that, just look up Google cool food meals, and you'll see how that actually works. And we're seeing a lot of discussions around the role of soil health in climate change and regenerative agriculture. And that discussion is going beyond farmers. And within agriculture, with farmers, we're seeing discussions around soil profitability rather than just productivity as well. The World's Food Prize, which is basically the Nobel Prize for Agriculture, was won by Dr. Lau. He is a soil scientist. The top documentary last year on Netflix was Kiss the Ground. And that was all about regenerative agriculture, making soil the hero. So that's definitely rising. Of course, for that to happen, we need to start compensating farmers for their efforts. And the government needs to recognize the role of carbon sequestration in agriculture. And this trend is actually mainstreaming into consumer packaged goods as well. So General Mills owns Annie's Mac and Cheese, and they've actually made regenerative agriculture part of their mission statement. And while regenerative agriculture doesn't have any official definition, they've defined it as having 3 pillars: soil health, above ground diversity, and farmer economic resilience. And in the US, there is Nouri, which is an online marketplace that allows farmers to get paid for storing carbon in the soil. And they receive these Nouri blockchain tokens, which are converted into carbon removal certificates. And then they can be sold to businesses who are looking to offset their carbon emissions. So that's a real win-win for farmers, buyers, as well as the planet. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about cultivated or cellular ag trend. In my opinion, the investment in this makes sense for a food system like Singapore or Israel, where they're looking for food security. But if you look at Canada, we're in a very different place. We're resource rich, we've got lots of land, and I don't think the economics really work for this country. So while there's lots in the press, I don't think we're there yet. Though I do think it could have a role in input. So for instance, dairy, it may have a role. If dairy is an ingredient, you're able to make what you need and have it there on the factory floor just in time. So there, it may make sense. But we are seeing seaweed start to make waves. It's progressively lost its ick factor. It's being appreciated by chefs for its unique umami flavor. And it's also got lots of nutritional benefits as well. And we're starting to see seaweed as a protein show up in snacks and jerkies and even edible food wrappers. And it's starting to, it's mainstreaming. It's just shown up in a company, a seafood, a plant-based seafood company called Good Catch. It just raised $32 million US. And its funders were in part Maple Leaf through its Green Life Foods and General Mills venture arm as well. So definitely getting some mainstream attention. And so we also think that there is a different way of doing flexitarian in terms of reducing your impact. And again, it's that and rather than or. And we dub it lessitarian. And you've got a great product in Manitoba in Bump, which is again 30% pea protein and 70% beef. So it allows you to enjoy all the taste and still lessen your carbon imprint. And you can see Maple Leaf also has a 50-50 product out there. And Maple Leaf has actually redefined their vision. They are now looking to be the most sustainable protein company on earth. And you don't see the word meat anywhere. So they're really redefining who they are. And these blended products are showing up not just in meat, you're seeing them in dairy as well. Live Real Farms, that's owned by some US dairy farmers. And it's a 50-50 blend of dairy and almond. Bell is a French company. They have the Baby Bell cheeses. They have a half cheese, half plant-based product as well. So it's a way of combining the best of both worlds. You get those great plant-based products that are stable and the true flavors that consumers crave. So again, the best of both worlds. And we know that meat and dairy are real hot buttons for Generation Z as well as the millennials. So another question is, can you trade consumers up to some of those labels that they view as more humane, more premium, more sustainable? So grass-fed, CRSB is another great one as well. Protecting native grasslands, Blue Nest is down in the US. And ethics-based eating isn't just for consumers. We're starting to see this move, what's good for me is also good for Fido. And we've seen a real explosion of pet ownership during the pandemic. Pets actually make up 20% of the world's meat consumption. And many consumers are also starting to look at their carbon paw print, so to speak. While I think that insect and mealworm protein, I don't see those ever getting over their ick factor for humans, I do think that it has a role in pet food going forward, especially if you look at dogs, a number of who have allergies to beef. So that could be something there. I bring this up because we're really starting to see lines blurring between human and pet food production. So Ben & Jerry's actually just launched a line of frozen dog treats in US grocery. And doggy desserts, they're made from the same ingredients as their non-dairy human desserts, and they're actually being shelved beside the human desserts. So they're not, being put in a pet food section. So the idea when you treat yourself, you can also treat your pet. And we're seeing a lot of these lines blurring. General Mills, owns Blue Buffalo. Smucker's owns Meow Mix, Milk-Bone, and Nestle is also in the pet food industry in a big way. So expect to see a lot more links between what we're eating, what's good for me is good for Fido. So question, we've seen a huge rise in organics. Will regenerative organic certified be the next level that we're looking? And, have you looked at your environmental footprint? Is there a way to make it better or to get credit for all of that great work that you're already doing? Quite often, we tend to take what's best for us for granted. So you may have bragging rights and things that you're all just naturally doing that the consumer doesn't know about, and you should be telling them. Science me. So, this is interesting. When you look at all these new meat analogs, we've just been through a period of time where consumers have really moved to more real food. They want to get away from processed food bad. And yet there seems to be this exception when you get to meat analogs. And a lot of these people who have been eating, who have moved to plant-based for health reasons, once they start reading the ingredient lists, not so great. And also, we're seeing products that have, ingredients like this hemp protein, lab-grown hemp. Consumers have rejected, in a large part, GMOs. Are they going to embrace this? And what's going on here? So will consumers start going back to more real food and move away from this? And we've seen a lot of activity in the press around this, full page ads with different companies calling the other one out. The first ad was in the US from the Center for Consumer Freedom, actually funded by Tyson and some others, where they were calling out what was in Beyond Meat and Impossible Burger. Those companies since reformulated after this ad. And we've also seen Light Life, which is owned by Maple Leaf Foods, do a similar thing to their competition. Spain's, I think it's called Herrera, has also just launched, and they are dubbing themselves the healthiest vegan burger on the planet. And they claim to have a new innovative fat analog that takes extra virgin olive oil into a solid form that's healthier and more sustainable than the coconut oil that a number of these meat analogs have. And we're certainly, seeing these ultra processed foods. Consumers are starting to question it, as our industry. There's a lot of research that says ultra processed foods, there's a link to heart disease, there's a link to obesity. France is looking at actually labeling foods with a warning. So Chipotle, the head of Chipotle came out and said that they will never have these products there. They will just instead have whole foods like tofu and pulses. More and more consumers are starting to reject this. Now, of course, you can't take credit for being better for the climate if you're also not addressing packaging. Through sustainability is a 360 degree thing. And so if you look at solutions there, single-use plastic, that was certainly not a term that you heard consumers ever use up until a couple of years ago. And then there was a lot of focus on that. It's taken a bit of a pause during the pandemic, but it will return with a vengeance once we get out of this. And packaging is a huge part of this. And I think there's an acknowledgement that just saying something is recyclable, it doesn't work. Waste streams get mixed up. You still have to deal with things. And everybody's confused about what gets put where. And so the move forward is going to be on reduction strategies rather than recycling. Of course, consumers always put the onus on industry. And if you're in plant-based, you will be held, I believe, to a higher standard if you're already trying to wave that climate flag. And I just wanted to show a couple of companies that are doing some interesting things. No Evil Foods, they pledge to remove twice as much plastic waste as they generate. And so they're claiming to be the first plant-based meat brand to actually be plastic negative. They're in a collaboration with Repurpose Global, and that's a movement that funds the removal of plastic from oceans. So they're doing it that way. Impact Snacks, they're out of Boston. They have a home compostable wrapper, and they also support that with a social and environmental impact program where the consumer can choose to contribute to either tree planting projects for reforestation or renewable energy projects. And we're gonna open it up for a couple of questions. Certainly, if you have any questions that you think of after the fact, my email's there. Please link in with me. I said you could download the trend report at our website, nourish.marketing, or you can just snap that QR code and you'll get a link there as well.
Oh, thank you, Joanne. That was an excellent presentation. We're, obviously in the retail business, we're seeing a lot of similar trends, but you went in depth in a lot of them. Some of it is around, consumer insights and innovation, and how do you become innovative and true innovation when your consumers aren't really leading you that way. What's one way of looking, almost a gut feel versus data kind of thing. That's one of the big challenges, right? Is how do you perceive what's in the future, especially around, a lot of it is around plant-based. How do you take that leap of faith into, yes, we know the market's going there, we're not really seeing the numbers, but.
Yeah, and you don't want to be bleeding edge, right?
Right. And
A lot of
that's the
times,
challenge though, right?
That is the challenge. You can be too far ahead of consumers. And
Right.
I mean, I'm sure everybody's heard that old saw of, if you asked a consumer, the whole old Henry Ford quote, right? If you'd asked consumers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse.
Right.
So, consumers are not going to give you the answer. You often have to lead consumers. But the reason we do that, our trend report, is, the signals that we're seeing out there and where those gaps in the market are and where is the market going. So what is going to be the next thing, right? And, certainly we're seeing lots of signals around immunity, health, and things like that right now as well. And you're trying to find where the white space is and where consumers are going next. But innovation's tough because you can't necessarily rely on consumer research, right? A lot of people will do, and I come from big companies. You mentioned P&G, Unilever. We did a lot of consumer research, and a lot of that consumer research, I would say, was more, they say a lamppost to lean on. Rather than to shine a light on something, so you could say to management, well, it didn't work, but the survey said, I think we're sort of in that perpetual beta. If you look at Silicon Valley, they're very much, minimal viable product, right? You get it out there without spending a ton of money. And it's not 100%, but you're trying it, right? Trial balloons, and you just keep changing it and updating it. So I think probably more product innovation around that. And the nice thing right now is, you don't have to get on store shelves to do that now. You can go direct to consumer, right? You can try an idea, selling it that way, and see if you've got enough marketplace, enough people who are interested. You can find that community or tribe who are going to be predisposed to your product and targeted at them as well. I always said farmers market's another great, place for innovation on a very small scale as kind of a test market to see if, this new product has a possibility. And then you move to the next step, which is, going to you and getting it listed in your store.
Right. Now we do see a lot of launches that fail, but for different reasons as well. But some of those that, and we're willing to forgive, and I think the retail industry has changed a lot, where we are looking for real innovation. We're looking at trends and trying to bring those products in and then try to help market those.
And more local innovation too. I think retailers have done a great job over the last couple of years
Yeah,
of really
yes.
showcasing local.
Yeah, and local's, extremely important, especially being a co-op. It's even more important to us as ever. And just leading to that, so we know, there's a big trend on e-commerce. And we have difficulty in not only in our private label brands, but even smaller brands or hyper local brands. How do we call those out on an e-commerce platform, right?
Mhm.
Because that's the big challenge, because a lot of decisions these days are made at store shelf. So you go to the store, you see something, and then they're alternative, meat alternative, for example, being one of them. It's right beside the beef, and you're like, oh, I didn't even know this product existed. How do you get that message out through e-commerce? Right, that's a big challenge.
It's a huge challenge. And I think with e-commerce, that whole, as you say, that whole discovery part of shopping is really lost right now. And I don't think anybody has a great platform yet as a retailer to find that discovery. And I think there's, we could get into a real rut of, predictive modeling on the retailer side, just continuing to order the same thing over and over again. So yeah, how do you get into that shopping basket? It's going
Right.
to be it's going to be a challenge, and hopefully both retailers and consumers do work together. Or
Yeah, it's just trying to solve it is really, really, especially the trend towards local, and we've really, really seen an uptake on local products. It was strong before, but it's even stronger now because of the pandemic. Origin is very, very important. We saw a bit of it last year on consumers trying to move away from U.S. made products just because of all the political things that were going on in the States. Um, you know, Challenges bringing stuff in from Asia as well. So how do we build that industry in Canada is very, very important. But then how do we communicate that message? Just around sustainable packaging, I know you talked a bit about it. What do you see the future there? See, our challenge is really trying to find solutions for a lot of that single-use plastic. There's not a lot of alternatives today, and even as you talked about recycling, most of that stuff's not recycled. Or
no.
if you go biodegradable, most of that stuff is not being biodegraded, because you really need an industrial composter and you need the municipality. So it's more of for me, is working together with our municipal governments, provincial governments, federal governments, and industry to try to solve this problem. And it is a very, very big problem.
Yeah, one thing I didn't talk about, because I think we had it in last year's trend report, and the whole bring your own containers and
Yes.
whatnot, everything got put on pause. But if you look at the Terra The Loop program right
Yes.
now that Loblaws has just started to put into test, they announced it over a year ago. With the pandemic, it stopped. But the whole loop, for people who don't know, it really looks at packaging in a way as an asset. So if I am selling, a bottle of pop, let's say, and say 10 cents of that pop is going towards that bottle that gets thrown out. If I now look at that as multiple use, I will invest in the packaging. It's similar to my background in the beer industry. We had something called the industry standard bottle, where that would get reused an average of 18 times. So that's what Loop does.
Right.
So Haagen-Dazs is coming out with these beautiful packages, which takes a premium ice cream even further premium. And the consumer basically just pays a deposit, and then they return it back to the grocery store. It gets cleaned, it gets sent back to Haagen-Dazs, and they refill it again. So I think that will be a step forward as well. There's some growing pains with the pandemic, so we'll see what happens with the test that Loblaws is doing right now.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I didn't know Haagen-Dazs was doing that. That's very, very interesting.
Yeah, and it's not just Haagen-Dazs. There's a number of
Yeah.
different suppliers. Yeah.
I know we went to an Art Pet water bottle, and that water bottle becomes another water bottle, becomes another water bottle. So I really love that. I'm just wondering why that's not used more in the industry. That kind of, you know, uh, that same container is used for the same product rather than try to find a home for that recycled product, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But you need that stream. And that's the nice thing with, you need the system in place. And that's the nice thing with this loop system. It actually does that, similar to what,
Exactly.
similar to how the beer industry, you returned your bottles, you
And
got your refund back, and then it went back into the production system.
right, right, right. Just a few more questions here. You highlight a number of trends that have emerged during the pandemic. In your opinion, which of these trends are going to stay beyond the pandemic? Do you see anything there?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of these will. I think climate, we are going to be focused on this. Once we get through what we're going through right now, I think there's going to be a huge refocus on climate, because during the pandemic, there's this realization, not just with Gen X or not with Gen Z and millennials, but everybody now recognizes how globally we're all connected.
Right.
And the health of the planet, I think, is going to be the next thing we really focus on.
Yeah. What do you think about like cooking at home? I know there's a lot of, my daughters who've never cooked before are all of a sudden sending me pictures of all the creations they're doing. And I think it's really cool. And I think it's really cool to see the younger generation really get into it and having those home meals together. We've seen trends of breakfast increasing, all those things. Do you still continue to see something like that?
Yeah, I mean, where we eat, I think will continue to change. People are not going to go back to work quite in the same way. So there will be more working from home, even after the pandemic, because I think it's shown that maybe not 100% of the time, but at least 20% of the time you're going to be working at home. And so that really changes, especially the breakfast occasion, where people would go to quick serve restaurants and things like that. So I think there's still going to be a need for convenience foods in the morning. In terms of cooking skills, yes, consumers got a lot of cooking skills, but they are fried right now. They are done. And so I do think that they're going to be looking for more shortcuts. So they've gotten a little more gourmet maybe in their taste, but I think
Yeah.
we're going to see a huge increase in the need for spices and cooking sauces and shortcuts. So, supermarket meal kits and things like that, because life is going to get busier again. And a lot of this cooking during the pandemic has been out of boredom. And once boredom goes away, and
sure.
life gets
For
busier,
sure.
and you've got to get the kids to soccer again and everything else, I think, things aren't going to go back to exactly where they were before.
Yeah.
Right. But we're not going to be cooking. We're not going to be feeding that sourdough starter and making bread quite the way we were during lockdown.
Yeah. So you see it kind of, the trend slowly going kind of back. Although, you know what?
Not all the way. Not all the way.
Not all the
But
way. And I agree with you, Joe, because I think a lot of people are still going to be working from home. There's going to be still a lot of options for more so than before. Companies are going to look at that and say you know, we're going to have more flexibility there for workforce to work from home if they like. So I think I agree with you. I think there's going to be somewhat of a boom as soon as this is over, and people are going to want to go out and celebrate.
yeah.
All that other stuff. But I was just interested to see if any of those trends are long lasting. You talked about snack trending. What are some of the trends you see around snacking and protein snacking? Because that's always been a big.
Yeah, so snacking, I think, has changed a little during the pandemic. We're still snacking, but it's not the same convenient on-the-go portability snacks
Yeah.
that you need, right? So it's, consumers are buying bigger formats because they're at home and everybody's snacking. So we've gone back to the traditional 3 square meals a day, but our snacking hasn't come down. And that's why everybody's putting on the COVID-15 right now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because we're just all consuming more food out of anxiety and boredom. So snacking has, I think consumers are going to want healthier. There is a trend away from diet culture. Certainly we're seeing, and health is being redefined. And I think people are understanding the role of food and mental health as well.
Right.
And so, permissible indulgences, healthy snacks that may also make me feel good mentally as well as physically, I think are going to be critical. And less of a need on the whole portability, because maybe you will be eating in your car or giving them to the kids at soccer, but more snacking's happening at home as well.
Right. You talked a lot about innovation on plant-based proteins, which is obviously growing and will continue to grow. What impact, or how do we deal with traditional meat, and how can they innovate or change to keep pace, or at least change that message, because of health or sustainability? What are some of the trends you see there towards traditional?
Yeah, so one thing is just convenience. So moving consumers along, as you say, are consumers going to be cooking from scratch quite the same way? No. So can you have the pre-seasoned, the pre-cut, maybe a little bit more of that? Consumers over this period of time have also experimented a little bit more with non-traditional proteins. So those specialty meats, I think they'll continue to be interested in those. Fish as well, right? There's been a real uptick in fish, which traditionally would have been more in fine dining. I think calling out that whole transparency is critical. So it's the quality of the protein, because meat protein is not the same as plant protein. So call out what's good about meat protein. We don't do enough of that. And, consumers aren't as educated as all of us are about that.
Right.
That's why I say, we often take what's best about us for granted. So you need to call out some of those things about yourself, about your product, as well as, just how are those animals treated? I know no farmer who mistreats their animals, right? That would just be stupidity. But, we're fighting a lot of activist videos, especially from south of the border, that, where there's a lot of factory farming compared to up here. And so that's what the average consumer has in their head. So again, that's why I say pull that curtain back a little bit and show consumers what life on your farm looks like, on your website. Show pictures on your packaging if you can, because what's in the consumer head versus reality often are very different. And if you've got grass-fed, if you've got, sustainably raised, certified humane, call that out as well.
She'll trace it right back to the farm.
Yeah, if you can.
Kind of that farm to fork message. And I can't remember, someone did this, and on their social media, where, they showed, a Thanksgiving dinner, and then trace that vegetable or meat or dessert or whatever ingredient right back to the grower, and then told the story of that grower right there. And it was a continual thing. It was, not a one-time series. It just ran for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I thought that was brilliant, tracing it back. And, you're not eating this because you bought it at a grocery store. This is the actual person who grew this product. And
Yes, those stories, those emotions are really important.
Yeah.
And that's also why we've seen this huge rise in supporting local. We want to support our neighbor, whether we know them or not. We want to support our community. So anytime you can pull it back and tell those stories, that's going to be really powerful. Yeah,
you want to add value, right? Back to your grower, back to your community. Well, I think that's it. Thank you very much, Joanne. That was awesome. I thought you did a great job. Learned a lot, and thank you.
Thank you.